Michael, welcome back to the Leadership Edge conversation series. We're excited to discuss your most recent article about toxic cultures and leaders within that culture and how we can show up and affect positive change in those environments. And so let's dive in right into our questions. In the article, you explore a colleague, Steve.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about his story in a nutshell and how he chose to show up in his toxic culture.
Steve was brought into our organization with a heavy focus on helping the organization fulfill its purpose, its vision. And he was a very disciplined individual. He had come out of the military and wanted to make a big difference in the organization. He didn't know that the organization was toxic before he came in. He was impressed with the leaders of that organization, but he had a lot of discipline when it came to the way that he did his work, and he brought a lot of value to the organization. Then as he came in, he saw that the organization was toxic. He recognized that. He was able to articulate that, but it didn't deter him.
So you touched on the fact of where he came from and the discipline he had. And in the article, you talk about 5 strategies for thriving in the midst of toxicity. And number 1 on that is know who you are. Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about how Steve, in particular in this situation, really knew where he was, even though he was within a culture that didn't really reflect his values.
He knew who he was because he had a really good foundation of purpose. He knew who he was in context of what he brought to the organization, the value he brought to the organization. He knew who he wanted to help. He knew his sort of client avatar that he could help the most. And then he was very, very clear about what he wanted to accomplish, and he was clear about the disciplines necessary to accomplish those things. According to Dr. Joe Rubino, 85% of adults have a negative self-image. We struggle to believe in ourselves. We struggle to know who we are. We struggle to know where we want to go. And then obviously, if you don't know who you are or where you want to go, it's hard to know what disciplines are necessary to maintain in order to fulfill your purpose and vision. Steve knew who he was and was clear and was able to accomplish many great things in the face of toxicity because he knew who he was.
Eventually, it affected some positive change. And you even said here that eventually he saw that performance skyrocketed. Sales numbers quadrupled in 2 years. The team's morale shifted. It led to employee retention, reduced absences, and a stronger sense of unity. So he saw great growth within his team and the performance, but eventually it really didn't win the entire culture over and he decided to leave. So tell us a little bit about seeing the growth, but ultimately he decided to go in a different direction.
Steve had a construct within that greater conglomerate, in the greater organization. He had a division, he had a department that he was in charge of eventually, and he was able to make great change, which affected potential change within the greater organization. However, if you have one set of, or one group of people, which we call a subculture, making great decisions, and the rest of the organization is not on board, eventually that will die out. And that is a tough thing to recognize and to accept, which is tough for all of us. But Steve still woke up every day and he said, I want to be a light in the darkness. And he walked in and he was able to help those individuals on his team transcend the toxicity that they were facing every day.
Michael, tell us a little bit about some key indicators that a culture is toxic.
The easiest one to recognize is BCDE: blaming, complaining, deflections, and excuses. In toxic cultures, they are aplenty. In highly engaged cultures, people show up excited about the purpose and the vision of the organization. In toxic cultures, people don't know where they're going. They don't know where the organization's heading. The leaders aren't very clear about the vision of the organization. They certainly don't talk about the purpose, and they don't sit down with individuals to find out how to best utilize their gifts, talents, and abilities. Pay attention to organizations where there's a toxic culture, frustrated, angry, scared, hostile. It's because they are lost. They do not know where they are going, and they certainly don't know how to get to where they want to go.
knowing those and identifying them, if that's where one of our listeners is at, it could be quite overwhelming.
Sure.
So let's shift our attention towards equipping ourselves for how we show up every day. You say here, a sense of direction can provide a clear and much needed perspective on your role in a toxic environment. So tell us about how knowing where you're going, knowing where this organization's going, helps you to show up and really perform well and to affect positive change in an environment.
Toxic environment, one of the key indicators is they don't know where they are going. How do you know that you can transcend something? It's by this. A vision is a future as it should be with the conviction that it should be. The conviction is the key indicator that you have the ability to transcend what is going on around you, because the conviction is that driving force, that still small voice, that inspirational person inside of you that's saying, get above this because we can affect change. I believe we can affect change. I believe I can affect change in the world, no matter what's going on around me. If you believe it and you show up every day with that belief.
Well, what if someone doesn't believe, or if they don't have that conviction, they want to have it, can they create it in themselves? How do you spend time building up conviction?
You've got to first sit down and figure out who you are. It's not out of the realm of possibilities to sit down in one session and have somebody say, I am good at this, 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 and this. And then you take the organization and their roles and responsibilities and you say, how do you use those things you're really good at to help perpetuate the mission, vision, potentially of the organization? And a person be able to figure out, oh, this gift that I have is really effective when I utilize it.
So that connection, you're saying, starts to spark something in them, a belief that, hey, you know what, there's purpose for why I actually go to work every day.
Yeah, and you think about it like this. Say a person is an excellent communicator, but they don't communicate on a broader scale. And they're watching the fumbling, bumbling, and stumbling of communication within their organization. And they have the conviction that I can make a change here. Now you're at a decision point because you have to be bold enough to go to those others in your organization and say, hey, I think I can help us fix this communication problem. And you may face, well, what do you mean communication problem? Well, I feel like I'm the greatest communicator. And you have to face the tension to make change. And that's what conviction does. Conviction gives you courage to take your gifts, talents, and abilities and infuse them for the betterment of the organization.
In your in the article on the 5 strategies for thriving, you talk about confronting that, not as a bully, but with boldness. Mm-hmm. And you even quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and saying, hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. So give us a few tips on how you can boldly confront toxicity.
What people do because they're fearful or because they want to control is they'll take fire. You stop it. I'm going to shut this down. I don't want to hear this anymore. And they're perpetuating hate to hate. And it just creates a wildfire. So to confront, it is empathy. It's sympathy. It's compassion. It is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and saying, what is behind this hate? It's fear. It's doubt. It's worry. It's lack of control. It's feelings of powerlessness. So having grace and looking at people who are in that state and having mercy, being forgiving. And that's essentially how you start to drive it out. It's very practical.
So for you, I mean, I know you personally, and within our team at High Performance, we use DISC workplace profiles. And I know you as a strong D with some I tendencies. And I know that a strong DI, it's not as natural for them to show up with compassion, empathy, and sympathy. So tell us a bit about how you cultivated that.
At the end of the day, it's not about me. My whole role as a leader is first to create an environment that everybody who is a part of it can thrive. I also have to recognize that other people don't think, they don't behave, and they do not communicate like me. And that's why things like DISC and doing DISC workshops with your team to understand where everyone's coming from are so eye-opening. because I used to think that everybody thinks sort of the same way, and I had to learn how to humble myself. And I had to learn to say, I may not be right. And in fact, I find out I'm not right about a lot of things. But we collectively can be right about nearly everything, as long as we check our egos at the door and we take the time to listen, we take the time to engage. You can get a lot of things done.
You've come to accept that not everyone thinks, behaves, communicates the same way as you. And that has helped you to cultivate empathy, because you're always wondering, hey, how are they seeing things? But for someone who doesn't have a leader like that, who's maybe very focused on the bottom line or on reaching certain sales goals, but doesn't show up that way, talk about that choice they have to show up and be that way, even though the environment isn't.
Technical competency is essential and vital to the growth of a business. I've had to learn that the hard way many, many times over. You cannot be lazy in financial management, technical management. You cannot be. You have to be disciplined. But the question is, what is the purpose of this? This work that I am doing, if I do it well, is going to help another human being have a better life. If that doesn't get you excited, you should not be a leader.
If you were sitting across from someone who was in a toxic culture, what would be the best first course of action that you would encourage them to take?
If you want the world to change, you have to change. You have to look hard in the mirror and say, what am I doing to affect the change? Now, let me walk you down the path. If you are consistently showing up every day and you are convicted and you are giving your gifts, talents, and abilities freely to help the organization, and it does not change, you have one of two options. You stay and continue the work until you feel you cannot take it anymore, or you go elsewhere. There are plenty of places to go. They do not deserve you. I'm telling you straight up, if you're in an organization that does not value your gifts, talents, and abilities, find one that does. But before you go, confront. Don't walk away without confronting. And I'm talking looking people in the eyes and telling them the absolute truth about the culture. It is one of the most difficult things to do. And you're going to have to tell them this is a toxic culture and this is why. And you may even have to tell them that your behaviors are a large reason why it is toxic. Because one thing that we know, Vincent, is when we start to survey and evaluate toxic cultures, most of the leaders, they don't know that it's toxic. Most leaders who are poor leaders don't know that they are poor leaders because nobody tells them. And they leave it to us. But the fact is, you start by looking in the mirror. And if you're happy with the work that you're doing, then continue. Ratchet it up. Turn it up a couple volumes. See if you can't look at more ways to make a positive change. But if it doesn't change, then you've got to change. Because for the world to change, you have to change.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate the conversation.
Me too, Vince. Thanks, buddy.
Follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook to learn more about our events and programs, and subscribe to this YouTube channel and click the bell icon to receive notifications for the Leadership Action Step video every month.